Susan East Nelson with Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families, Devante Lewis with Louisiana Budget Project, and Erin Brock with Second Harvest Food Bank are next. And again, if you guys can keep your remarks to with under 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Susan East Nelson. I'm here on behalf of the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families, and I'm ready for lunch too, so I'll keep this as brief as possible. This is what we're talking about here. It's a cheese sandwich. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about, giving children in school who need nutrition to learn and focus and grow. So I really, I was counseled that I wasn't supposed to use the word shame. And of course, I don't work for the people who told me to do that, not to do that. So, well, we ought to be embarrassed that we're even having this conversation. In a state with this many resources, in a state with this many natural resources and things that are off of our shores, that we're even having a conversation about giving children less than what we can give them to grow. And so I've heard some of the comments that, you know, meal debt could be upwards of $200,000 a year. Well, certainly we could get some business or some tax credit or something to cover the unpaid meal debt if this is just going to absolutely bankrupt our school districts. So I just, you know, we have a habit in this state of doing things to our children, and this is our opportunity to do something for our children. And so I really appreciate the support of the committee, and I definitely thank Representative Smith for being here to offer this bill today.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Ms. Brock.
Hi, my name is Erin Brock. I'm with Second Harvest Food Bank. We cover 23 parishes from the Mississippi border to the Texas border of South Louisiana. And I work specifically with our child hunger program. So we know that 1 in 4 children in South Louisiana are food insecure, which means that they don't always know where their next meal is coming from. They don't know what it's going to look like. It's a rampant issue in the entire state. And we are able to focus our programs on the times when we consider children to be most vulnerable from hunger, and that is after school, on the weekends, and during the summer, because they are covered so well by the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. I work closely with our school partners specifically, and the biggest issue that we have in implementing our programs in schools, it isn't finding partners, even though they already have so much on their plate, isn't getting the food out. It's really that stigma piece of students and families not wanting to ask for help, not wanting to feel like they've been singled out or that they've done something wrong. And oftentimes we approach this by really engaging the whole school community, not singling anyone out, not taking a student to a private office or making them feel like it's punitive, but really getting the entire school behind that support and making sure everyone has access to the resources that we're providing. Because kids are really perceptive. I think an argument that I've heard is that a child may not realize they're receiving an alternative meal or that they're being singled out in a way. But in my experience, that is not true. Kids are very perceptive, and I have no doubt that they know that they're being treated differently, and I have no doubt that their peers also notice this. I'm concerned about a policy that's going to other a child in any way, as I think many of us are, and that would teach their peers that someone who has less than them deserves, or someone who comes from a worse background than they do deserves less than they do. So from the food bank perspective, we rely heavily on programs like the school lunch program to provide for families, and we try and fill those gaps outside of there, and we can't do it alone with just our efforts. We fully support this bill, and we hope that we have the community's support as well.
Thank you, Ms. Brock. Mr. Lewis.
Good morning, or good afternoon probably by now. Devante Lewis with the Louisiana Budget Project. Before I started there, just about 2 months ago, I was a educator. I worked in a school system in Georgia. It was not here that participated in this policy. And part of my job was discipline, and I had the privilege of being over cafeteria management and lunch duty. And I can speak to just how our cafeteria staff, first off, I want to say, and our nutrition office went out of their way not to shame the child. However, students noticing that they had an alternative meal, getting a brown paper bag with a sandwich and a fruit snack, caused significant issues in discipline. And so there was a particular student that I would work with who had discipline issues already, and once he got on getting an alternative meal, right before lunch, you would see a skyrocket in classroom disturbance. he would start to throw chairs. And it was a direct policy, or it was a direct reaction to knowing that when he went into the classroom or to the lunchroom, he was going to have an alternative meal. So it has a direct effect on discipline and education as well. And I just want to mention that how did this conversation start? It really started in 2010 when Congress passed the Healthy, Hungry-Free Kids Act that required USDA to study policies of unpaid meal debt and to come up with recommendations. In 2016, the department released their report that has about 96 pages with alternative ways, and they made the case that while the federal government and USDA wanted to ban this practice, they wanted to leave it to states and local districts to make that decision, and that's what we're here today to talk about. To answer Representative Simon's question, there are multiple states that have enacted this: New Mexico, Washington State, California, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, and the director of the West Virginia Department of Education Child Nutrition Office said that when they enacted this policy, that they heard no major hiccups of this policy, and it's a good practice because it allows adults to work strictly with adults, and they have encouraged counties and in their districts to look at social services referrals as ways to solve meal debt. And so while there are some cost issues, especially I know the fiscal note mentions the state of New Mexico, there are a lot of differences in the New Mexico law that I think just have to be mentioned that showcase why. First, New Mexico enacted their law to include private schools, parochial schools, Indian tribes, and a lot of different other areas. It also did not allow a school district to give an alternative reimbursable meal, which Representative Smith's bill does. So, for instance, Hobbs County, New Mexico has a debt about $45,000. They said if they had that, it would probably drop it down by half. So just to take that into account on the physical side of this
You need
notion.
to wrap it up, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, and I just will say that it's a policy that we need to look at and really do what's best for the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, there are no questions. Oh, there's a question, Representative Edmunds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm confused about, and I'm sorry. Can you tell me your name?
Erin
again?
Brock.
Erin, I know that you made mention of how perceptive the children are, and you have brought a prop to show us a sandwich that has a smiley face on it.
A frowny face.
Whatever. So obviously it's a total difference between a plate lunch of spaghetti, salad, and a roll and a smiley face or brown or whatever it is. So that is a lot of difference between the two. But I'm confused because in the language of this alternative reimbursable meal, which we are now being told is still not the same as A, but it's similar, but it's a little less costly, but yet I don't understand why we would do that. I don't understand how that a dietitian, for example, is going to parallel every day what they think a child can perceive between spaghetti and whatever. I don't know what's lesser that is going to cause that, even though you said you didn't want to use the word shame, whatever, but you did. And so I don't know that we're curing an ill here, and I'm sorry to have to pick on this, but I couldn't be quiet anymore because it's perplexing to me. If we're going to fix the problem, then I don't understand why we do that. It doesn't make any sense.
So it's my understanding that in a lot of the K-8 environments, they already have alternate meals for children who just don't eat whatever is on the menu. So if it's spaghetti and the kid doesn't eat spaghetti, they always have something extra, but it includes all those 5 components: the fruit, the vegetable, or whatever it happens to be, all of the necessary things that make it a full meal by the USDA standards. This allows them to go ahead and offer that alternative meal rather than just the cheese sandwich.
It's an assumption in every parish, there's 64 parishes with multiple dietitians and different leadership, that somehow we're going to accomplish this end.
Representative Edmunds,
seems unreasonable.
Under USDA guidelines, they actually suggested that part of the way you could solve that is, for instance, my school district offered 2 choices during lunch. So, for instance, one day it could be hot dogs and pizza. So what their suggestion was, and under the USDA guidelines, under this law, was to have school districts particularly look at making one of the second choices, if they offered 2 choices, as an alternative reimbursable meal for a lower cost. So while it's still a choice. Now, this was not as part of the Louisiana Budget Project. We've been pushing this. This was a compromise. We would prefer that not be, but it is a cost-saving way if you're talking about debt, if you're talking about trying to recoup, where you can use some of the federal guidelines, and they suggest that as a solution if you want to try not to keep your debt ratio lower if possible.
Yeah, I'm not certain that it would accomplish either. I haven't heard any testimony to me today that would say that you're going to provide a lower meal at a lower cost. I think all of that is all supposition. None of that convinces me at all. And then part two, then I put people that are great people that are serving our kids across the board in our cafeterias across the schools, which are phenomenal people. They do above and beyond. They work extra hours and hard to try to support every child they possibly can. I know that doesn't represent, that's like saying every teacher's a great teacher, but still, we have great folks in our parishes serving our children today, whether it's in a lunchroom, a gym floor that they're coaching, or whether in the classroom. And I hate putting our folks in the opportunity of saying, okay, well, I've got to choose now between how do I tell the child the lesser of two and how do I make the choice. I'm sorry. I'll yield. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Edmunds.
Thank you.
Okay, the board's clear now.
Ms. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Susan East Nelson. I'm here on behalf of the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families. I just want to follow up on some of the questions. Talking about going into the Department of Revenue and those kind of things. I don't know how many folks on this committee, well, I know Senator Milkovich, you're an attorney. I know sometimes when you write a letter and you tell them what could happen, that immediately triggers the action that keeps them from going to court or makes them do what you want them to do.
That doesn't work for me.
It actually works for me almost all the time. So sometimes when you write a letter to a person and say, look, this is what could happen. We could deduct this from your state tax return. You could be turned over to debt collection. That suddenly triggers a weight of importance in a parent who may have been ignoring a debt notice prior to that point. So we're giving them an extra tool that allows them to have some weight behind making parents paid unpaid debt. But I'd also like to issue a challenge here today for the folks on this committee, because it is now 11:58. I have with me a bag full of cheese sandwiches, and I challenge anyone on this committee to just eat a cheese sandwich for the rest of the day and go back to your office and figure out how you're going to do your job and make decisions on bills and run up and down the stairs and see if that's enough lunch for you. Because we've asked these kids to take standardized tests. We asked these kids to prepare for learning. We asked these kids to do long division, and all we're giving them is a cold cheese sandwich. And I think if you, in good conscience, can vote against this bill after walking in their shoes, then that's for you. But I don't think that you'll be a happy person at 4 o'clock this afternoon, because I know myself, I get really grumpy when I'm hungry, and it's really hard for me to concentrate. So I just challenge this. If anyone would like to take me up on this, I have cheese sandwiches here. I'd love to offer you guys to try this out and see how these kids, what this experience really is for these children. Thank you.
Wheat or rye?
I have more. They're actually on wheat.
I'm sorry, Ms. Brock.
Hi, my name is Erin Brock. I'm with Second Harvest Food Bank. We're a large food bank based out of Lafayette, New Orleans, covering 23 parishes in South Louisiana. And I understand all of the legal and financial complications with a bill like this and the concerns that everyone has. However, as someone who works every day in school settings and with child programs of children who come from a variety of backgrounds who are experiencing hunger, I just want to spend a couple minutes kind of bringing it back to the heart of this bill and the heart of the intention of this bill, which is protecting the child and reducing that stigma. So in Louisiana, we know about 1 in 4 children suffer from food insecurity, which means that they don't always know what their next meal is going to be, what it's going to look like, where it's going to come from, if they're going to have one. And we do have one of the highest child food insecurity rates in the country, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on your committee. However, at the food bank, we're able to focus our programming on the times when we consider children to be most vulnerable from hunger. So that is after school, on the weekends, and during the summertime, because we believe that they are so well covered by the school breakfast and school lunch program that we can focus our resources elsewhere to catch them in those gaps when they're not receiving those resources. Specifically, like I mentioned, I work closely with our school partners, and our biggest issue in running programs in schools, it isn't finding partners who are willing, teachers, social workers who are willing to take on that extra burden. It isn't getting the food out there. Really what it is that stigma. We have students as young as 7 years old who are afraid to ask for help, don't know how to, don't want to be singled out, don't want their peers to know that something's going on at home. And time and time again, we hear from our partners that students just won't ask for help, or even once it's offered to them, once they're approached, they just don't want to do it. And we've adjusted our programs to engage student leaders, to involve the whole community, to make it so that we're not siloing kids to this office in the back of the room, but instead we're involving the whole school community and letting them know that everyone deserves equal access to food and that it's not something to be ashamed of. And the reason why we do this is because kids are really perceptive, right? So at the root of this debate, we know that kids notice when they are being singled out, whether they are 6 years old, whether they are 16 years old. Their classmates notice, their teachers notice. It's something that is really going to affect them. This is not minor. And so after working in this environment for almost 2 years now, I'm really concerned about a policy that is going to other a child in any way and potentially teach their classmates that someone who has less than they do or is more vulnerable than they do deserves less. We know that food and having their basic needs and that is really important for student success. And I just hope that the committee understands at the end of the day what this bill is meant to do and why it's important for the future success of our Louisiana children.
Thank you, Ms. Brock. Dr. Llege.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to minimize your well-made point, but I would love a cheese sandwich right now. Dr. Keith Llege, representing Council for a Better Louisiana. And a few things about this bill. And I'll preface my comments by saying that I did receive permission from my wife to tell her story. She grew up one of 6 children. Her dad was an Air Force veteran and a plant worker. Worked every day of his life except for about 8 to 10 months when the plant laid him off. As a result, my wife was given a different colored card in the lunch line because she was not able to pay the full price. She was too ashamed to tell her parents that she was ashamed to have this card. And then she was too ashamed to go into the line with the card where other kids, her friends, could see. So she chose to just not go into the lunch line at all for those 8 months of the school year, and instead grabbed maybe a French fry here or something, a tater tot here from one of her friends. And she still tells that story today. It made a great impact on her life. As a school administrator for 11 years in a very large middle school in Lake Charles, at this school we have, and it's still that way, we have the wealthiest of the wealthy and the poorest of the poor in that school. And so I saw the whole gamut. Numerous times, myself, other folks on the staff paid for kids to eat because their parent neglected to do so. These kids don't have jobs. They don't have cars. They have no ability, maybe other than selling something on eBay, to make money. It is not their responsibility. It's not their responsibility. It's their parents' responsibility. And Senator Milkovich, you made a very good point about letting the schools handle this, and I appreciate that. As a former school admin, I really appreciate that. However, I see this, and I see this as an opportunity to give school administrators one more option, one more resource, other than using the students to get the parents to do what they're supposed to do. And I applaud Representative Smith for bringing this bill and for bringing awareness to this problem. And it is a problem. I don't know if this particular bill it covers all the solutions, but I think it's a start, and at least we're having a conversation about a real problem. Now, as far as maybe trying to get the bill in a better posture, Senator Walsworth, I agree with you that out of 180 days school year, 10 days. Look, I had 4 kids all in school at the same time, and there were days when you've got baseball practice and you're just spread all over the place, and 10 days can come and go very quickly. I agree with that. So maybe a compromise here is to increase that to maybe 20 days. 18 days would be 10% of the school year. I try to be a solutions-oriented person and not dwell on the problem, but let's fix this. There's a lot of money that I think maybe we could in the school districts where we could look at maybe helping this issue. Senator Appel, maybe there might be a motion to help with defray some of these costs instead of working through our kids. Maybe we could require, or at least ask, our school board members to pay their own membership fees into LSBA rather than that coming out of the general funds. That might be somewhat of a solution as well. So just trying to be solutions oriented here. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars that are coming out of the general fund to do that, and maybe some of that could go to defray some of these meal costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Llege. That wouldn't be S.J. Welch Middle School that you're talking about in Lake Charles.
Go
Mr.
Colts.
Lewis, I believe, went to that school. It was his principal, and I have a grandson there who I called prior to this. I called his dad to make sure his lunches were paid for. Senator Walsworth.
I appreciate y'all three being there, and I think what I hope that you see is C, which is the meat of the shaming, is not being touched at all. We have not even, I think we all believe that we ought to do something down that road. It's just trying to get some of the other outlying stuff. So, I mean, I think, look, my folks up in Monroe do a great job and the backpacks and stuff like that. And there's still times in which we just don't have that. For your information, our teachers don't have lunch at all. Not a sandwich, nothing, because they're busy with their kids during lunch. So FYI, just make sure that you include our teachers, and I think we know that. Our teachers don't get a lunch. They are always got their kids there. So, but this committee is not trying to go after what I think we think is the meat of which is C, on page 3. It's the other things that go around with it. It's the dollars. It's how to make this work, where it's not just such a burdensome on whatever else we're trying to do. But I think we're all unanimous about the middle part, the meat part, about what this bill is supposed to be about, which is C, and trying to figure out some other options with the rest of the bill. But I think Representative Smith knows we haven't gone down that road at all today. So anyway, just FYI. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walsworth.